A man has just pled guilty to the savage murder of a woman in her New York City apartment. While the crime itself may be shocking, the question of how he was on the loose to do this has no easy answer. We're going to break down the killing of Christina Yuna Lee and whether her killer will ever be released again. All with New York trial attorney Rich Schoenstein. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. It sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. A man follows a woman into her New York City apartment and stabbed her over 40 times. Brutal murder. Found dead in her bathtub. I'm talking about the 2022 killing of 35-year-old Christina Yuna Lee. And it was just this past week when 27-year-old Assamad Nash admitted it was him. Pleaded guilty to a charge of second-degree murder and a charge of first-degree burglary as a sexually motivated felony. He can now face up to 30 years to life in prison when he's sentenced next month on July 30th. But it's the details of how this happened that make this so chilling. Because according to authorities, at 4:20 a.m. on February 13, 2022, Christina was coming home from a night out with friends. She was entering her apartment building located near Grand Street and Christie Street, which is in Chinatown. And reporting indicates that she had been in this apartment for less than a year. And that is when Nash followed her into the building and up 6 flights of stairs to her apartment. As Christina entered her apartment, Nash ran up behind her, pushed his way inside, and attempted to sexually assault her. Apparently, this all escalated very quickly because Christina's neighbors called 911 after hearing sounds of a struggle, including her screaming for help. Police arrive on scene. They hear her screaming, but they couldn't breach the door. Apparently, it was barricaded. Now, at this point, Nash apparently attempted to flee through the fire escape, but then he goes back inside the apartment after he spots a police officer on the roof above him. So now we're at 5:40 a.m. when the NYPD break down the apartment door. They find Nash hiding under the mattress of Christina's bed. Did he really think that he wouldn't be found there? And then they also find a bloody knife hidden behind the dresser. And as I mentioned, they find Christina with at least 40 stab wounds to her head, her neck, her torso. She's pronounced dead on the scene. By the way, do you know how authorities have figured out the sequence of events? The New York Post reported that surveillance footage captured Nash walking behind Christina on the floor of her apartment complex. Looking at these still images is just so terrifying. It's so chilling. And let's talk a little bit more about Christina. So she was a senior creative producer at a digital music platform known as Splice. The company released a statement at the time of her death explaining how their hearts were broken, how she was a beautiful friend and colleague, and how she was beloved. There was a GoFundMe that was set up too. It's called the Christina Yuna Lee Memorial Fund. It actually raised over $430,000. And on the page it says, Christina was full of life. She radiated positivity, joy, and love. She supported her friends in everything that they did. She went above and beyond to make those she loved know she was there for them, never expecting anything in return. Her loss is an unfathomable tragedy that her loved ones and her community will struggle with for years to come. So let's talk more about the case. Let's talk more about this legal development. And I want to bring in right now New York trial attorney and Law&Crime legal analyst and host, Rich Schoenstein. Rich, good to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
Good to see you, Jesse.
So as we were talking about this case, first thing, you live near that area, or lived near that area,
No,
right?
I live now.
You live there now?
I've lived down there for 20 years. I live in Soho.
Yeah.
So I live a little bit north and a little bit west, but pretty close to Grand and Christie Street.
And we'll talk a little bit more about what was happening at this time, this anti-Asian American hate crimes that were happening. But generally speaking, that area of New York, is it crime-ridden? Do you ever hear anything like this?
No, so a couple of things. First of all, there's this narrative that New York is full of crime now. That's not my experience, having lived in the city for 20 years. I work in the city. I live there with my family. That area of the city has Soho. It has Chinatown. It has Little Italy. It is alive. It is vibrant. It is festive. It is celebratory. But it's a big city. And occasionally there is violence. Occasionally there is crime in the big city, including there.
And to make it clear, a lot of the cases that we cover, particularly homicides, are in not metropolitan cities. Some of them happen in houses. Some of them do happen in apartment buildings. But the idea that's happened in New York City, someone follows somebody into their apartment and murders them. How many times do we hear those kinds of crimes?
Yeah, not many. I mean, that is the scary part of it. Someone follows you from the street into your home, into an apartment. We do sort of think that's more likely to happen in a city setting than in the suburbs. People don't usually follow people into a house in the suburbs. So the city makes that maybe likelier to happen.
But you also wonder, there's so much surveillance like we
Right.
have in this case.
Right.
Sometimes there's doormen buildings, there's a lot of people out. We talk about how sometimes in rural areas no one's around, something can happen. But I think that's what makes this particularly chilling and just so distressing to hear about what happened to her. I want to go into the legal case here. So why did he plead guilty? Because he was initially arraigned on first-degree murder, on a first-degree murder charge and 2 counts of burglary. Why was this deal offered where he would accept guilt to second-degree murder and the charge of first-degree burglary?
Well, I assume it was, I obviously don't have inside information, but I assume it was a negotiation. He's going to plead guilty to murder, but not first degree. He's hoping for a sentence that gives him the opportunity of someday being out of jail, which probably wasn't possible with a first degree murder sentence. So that's what he gets in exchange for accepting guilt and not making the state of New York go through with the trial.
And I want to read some of the statute here. So about that sexually motivated felony, this is Penal Law 130.91. A person commits a sexually motivated felony when he or she commits a specified offense for the purpose, in whole or substantial part, of his or her own direct sexual gratification. And burglary is a part of that. So first, let's start there. They believe they had the evidence to prove he was following her and entered that apartment for the purposes of sexually assaulting her, right?
Yeah, they apparently do. They have video, I guess, of him following her. They know he broke in. They believe they would have had evidence to support that theory of what he was there for.
And go back to what he was originally charged with, first-degree murder, or arraigned on first-degree murder. In New York, it says that with the intent to cause the death of another person, he causes the death of such person or of a third person. There's also another way you could be found guilty of that, is that the victim was killed while the defendant was in the course of committing or attempting to commit, and in furtherance of, a burglary as one of the felonies. And then the second-degree murder charge, which is what he pled guilty to, is a little bit different. But it says that is with the intent to cause the death of another person, so there's second degree, or acting either alone or with one or more other persons, he commits or attempts to commit burglary, and in the course of and in furtherance of such crime or of immediate flight thereof, he or another participant, if there should be any, causes the death of a person other than one of the participants. So I know that's a lot of legalese, but basically saying first and second degree murder, similar, there's a difference. Again, do you think that they didn't feel confident they could have proven first degree murder here?
I don't know. Listen, to me, he stabbed her 40 times.
Yeah.
Right? So if they go in with that fact to a New York jury, they could have convicted him of anything they wanted. Right? That is a savage, vicious attack of a defenseless woman. There's no justification whatsoever. He's committing other crimes while he does it. So I suspect they would have had the evidence. They could have gotten him convicted, and they're accepting this plea so that they don't have to go through this process. And because second degree is close enough to first degree, that they get at least 30 years in jail.
Because, of course, a trial is painful. You have these witnesses who have to testify. The family of Christina would have to hear these gory details. A jury would have to see
it's
the medical
painful for
examiner's
everybody involved. It's traumatic. That's
Yeah.
a great point, actually. It's traumatic for the family. And it wouldn't be unheard of for the prosecutors to consult with the family in the course of this plea deal and see what they think. But it's traumatic for the people. It's traumatic for the jury. And it's expensive for New York City. So if they can get a conviction, if he's going to take a plea on the second to top charge, sometimes you'll do that. Remember that we do, as a general matter in the U.S. judicial system, we treat defendants better when they accept their guilt. That is just a fundamental thing about our judicial system. When they plead guilty, they generally get a better deal and slightly less jail time.
But it doesn't mean that they're always going to be released. And the reason I ask you, 27 years old, Mr. Nash is, 30 years to life, What are the circumstances that he could be released in his 50s or 60s?
Yeah, I don't know. I think you would have to show. I don't know what.
Especially for a crime like this.
Yeah, I don't know what his. I mean, you can't justify this crime,
No.
right? What is his justification? It sounds like there's something off about him, because obviously of what he did and the savageness. And you mentioned hiding under the mattress, which does not seem like a very good plan. So all of this tells you there's something off. So he'll be in prison for a long time. He'll be evaluated. He'll have opportunities to do things in prison that will be informative. I don't know what it's going to look like in 27 and 30 years.
If this was, and by the way, when I mention this, mental illness wouldn't be a defense to this crime. He wouldn't be found not guilty. But could mental illness be a factor that is considered in ultimately releasing him?
Yeah, absolutely. If he has mental illness and can get treatment, and that treatment can make him someone who could live in a society, then maybe you could get to a place where you'd release him. But the savageness of this attack is going to really inhibit that possibility.
It's just so graphic and so chilling. And here's the problem. This is why I wanted to have you on. I need you to explain something to me.
Yeah.
Okay? Let's talk about his history. So Nash had a rap sheet, prior arrests. It was dating back to 2015 for assault, burglary, drug possession, and at this time, he had 3 pending court cases for subway-related crimes. This is at the time he had killed Christina. So 1 was for allegedly trying to illegally sell a subway fare to an undercover cop. 2, allegedly running away from police after damaging MetroCard machines. And then 3, allegedly punching a subway commuter. Now, reporting indicates that he was arraigned on January 7th, the month before Christina's death. This was in front of Judge Herb Moses. And the judge ordered that Nash be let go without bail. He was on supervised release. So people like this have to be monitored, so they show up to their court dates. But what is that? That's it? And then Judge Moses didn't even order Nash to undergo a psychological evaluation, a psychological exam. What makes that significant is that in the past, Nash had been found to be unfit to stand trial following an examination. So people listening to that, Rich, will say, this could have been prevented. How was he out to just kill Christina? Is this a fault of our justice system? Is this a fault of the judge? Is this just a system? This is just the way it was. There was nothing more to indicate that he would have been a threat to society.
Okay, so hindsight is always 20/20.
Correct.
Right? We say that. So it looks like a bad decision, but almost all of those offenses you just went over are completely nonviolent. Almost all. Now,
But you heard his past.
He did punch a guy.
Yeah.
Right, he did punch a guy, so that's
yeah.
violent. And the part of it I would raise an eyebrow about is not doing a psychological evaluation. I agree with that. I don't know about should they have required him to post bail, then whether he's in or out depends solely on if he has money.
Right.
It has nothing to do with whether he's safe to be out. That is just, is he rich enough to be out? So I don't see that contributing. And I know we have a big debate about cash bail in New York City. But put that aside for a minute. It does sound like he had a pattern of unlawful activity, and maybe at some point there should have been some psychological analysis.
Yeah, but even the arrests in the past about with assault and burglary or possession, that would have been enough to keep him locked up.
Yeah, I mean, the possession things I put aside. That's not going to be enough in this day and age to keep him locked up. The only one really there is the assault, because that is physical, and I don't know the extent of it. I don't know if that person was hurt. I don't know if he threw a punch. I don't know what that means.
Here's the problem. So NBC4, they reported, quote, an analysis by New York City last month found a high rate of rearrest for defendants on supervised release, with 23% rearrested on felony charges after release. This is according to court data for January 2020 through June 2021. So a little bit of a different time than we are right now. But again, this happened back in 2022. And then it says when misdemeanors are factored in, the rearrest rate for those on supervised release is 41%. So that's according to NBC News. You're hearing those numbers. And again, does it take a case like this to say, maybe we have to re-examine who we're allowing on supervised release?
Yeah, I think a case like this is relevant to that discussion. There are always people who say that unsupervised release is a bad system. There are always people who say we should not let as many people out. But at the same time, we can't put everybody in jail. We can't put everybody who commits a relatively minor offense in jail just because they might commit a more egregious one later. That's not the way we do business. It isn't the way we should do business.
Yeah, and talking about trends, by the way, though, Christina, she was Korean American, and we can't forget that she was killed a month after Michelle Go, the Asian American woman who was killed when she was pushed in front of a subway car. Remember, at the time this happened, the city was very concerned about this rise in anti-Asian American hate crimes. And again, they were talking about this being perhaps a sexually motivated felony. But that is another part of this that I think is an important component.
They should be concerned because and we can track this to COVID. Ever since people responded to the COVID crisis by claiming it's a Chinese manufactured crisis, there has been an uptake in anti-Asian American and anti-Asian violence and hostility in this city. That I am sure of because I have friends and neighbors who have experienced it personally. And in most cases, it's much more benign, obviously, than this. And I'm not sure this was an anti-Asian thing as much as an attack on a
crime of opportunity.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's what this is, but that is definitely something that has been a concern, I think, since 2020.
Now, DA Alvin Bragg, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, released a statement saying today Assamad Nash was held accountable for senselessly taking Christina Yuna Lee's life after he followed her into her own home. Miss Yuna Lee's family and loved ones were deprived of a daughter, sister, and friend. My thoughts are with her family and our community as they continue healing from this tragedy. They would have been able to convict him, right? Because I think the sense was the evidence was so strong against him. There was no way. How would you even defend this? What avenues could a defense attorney even bring up during a trial here? It seemed like they had him dead to rights.
Unless there was some technicality or relating to his arrest or the evidence or something, I don't see how being found in an apartment, and I guess he went out and came back in and he was there with the victim, and I'm sure they have scientific evidence. I don't see any way that they wouldn't have convicted him.
The surveillance footage, when you see it, and they have the time codes, right? The time, which is again goes back to how we started. Seeing these kinds of crimes, it's horrific wherever it happens. But something happening in the city when you have CCTV footage and you have this kind of great evidence that could be used to determine who committed a crime, it seems unlikely that if someone were to commit a crime in this city in someone's apartment building, that it would be a case where we didn't know what happened, right?
Well, it's definitely increased the odds that we know that there's some sort of video evidence, either from a surveillance system, or how many times now do we get evidence because somebody took something on their phone,
right?
Or we just find some other random video. There's so much, there wasn't much video evidence when I began practicing
I'm sure.
law.
Yeah.
And now you rarely see a case where there isn't video and audio evidence.
Yep. And there's cameras not only in buildings, there's cameras literally on almost every street. And like you said, people are constantly on their phones. It tracks people. We see it constantly in the cases we cover on Sidebar and Law&Crime. Rich Schoenstein, really sad case. Appreciate your perspective. And hopefully with this new legal development, it obviously will not bring the family closure, but it does close a chapter in this. And like we talked about, it saves them the pain and heartache of having to hear all about this at a trial.
Yeah, our hearts go out to them. You can't do anything really to bring them true closure, but it is good to bring some justice to this.
Rich Schoenstein, good seeing you.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much. And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.